All right. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. My name is Laura, and I am the Teen Services and Outreach Librarian here at Franklin Public Library. And this is tonight's installation of Great Decisions. This is the two Koreas. So I will keep admitting people as people come in the next couple minutes, but we'll go ahead and kind of cover our ground rules. Just in case you have not joined us before. There we go. All right. So firstly, we want to thank the major sponsors who have made this possible. Of course, the Franklin Public Library Foundation, the Jerome J. and Dorothy H. Holes Family Foundation, Carol and Tom Donovan, and in memory of Doris Sargent. So if this is your first time joining us, this is how it's going to work. Please try to remember to stay muted on your end on Zoom during the video. That way it'll be easy for everyone to hear. We will watch the video together as a group. This one is approximately 25 minutes. And then at the end of the video, we will have some discussion questions to help guide our conversation. And then while speaking, you will need to unmute yourself in order to speak. And then once you're finished speaking, you can mute yourself again, just so we don't have kind of cross noise to make it hard to hear. And this program will be ended by 8 p.m. And this is the two Koreas. So the discussion rules, just pretty simple. Number one, be respectful of other viewpoints. Number two, stay on topic. And we don't have a huge number of people today with these Zoom sessions, so this one's a little less important, but try to remember not to hog the microphone, if you will, and please limit your comments to 2 to 3 minutes at a time to give everyone a chance to speak. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get the video started, and I will keep admitting people as need be. So this will just take a second for me to get the video going. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
This is South Korea today, the capital city, Seoul. In some ways as modern, as wicked, as anything in the Western world. Korea today seems like a very distant relative to that once war-ravaged land.
It was a transformation so dramatic that it could only be described as a miracle. When the Korean War ended in 1953, South Korea was impoverished and stagnant. Today, it is the world's 12th largest economy, an incubator of cutting-edge technology, and a potent cultural force. Great Decisions investigates South Korea's rapid development and examines its evolving partnership with the United States. The Korean Peninsula, next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by the Herford Foundation, PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP, and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
When the Korean director Bong Joon-ho arrived at the Incheon airport, fresh off his dramatic victory at the Academy Awards, a jubilant crowd gathered to applaud a native son.
South Korean public went absolutely crazy. They were so euphoric. They see it as having achieved something very special.
Parasite's critical success was just one more reminder that Korean culture has become a global phenomenon.
The success of Korean cultural exports has really, I think, changed the way that people around the world think about Korea. And it's also made Korea a very desirable place.
Increasingly, as Korean culture gains salience and awareness here in the United States, there's a mutual respect. The Koreans are constantly true to their traditional values, but also mixing, matching, creating, and experimenting.
The ascendance of Korean culture seems all the more remarkable to those who fully appreciate just how far South Korea has come.
I remember it was an omnipresent sight. Beggars on the streets at dinner time, begging for food, carrying tin cans. For South Korea to have achieved the level of freedom and democracy and wealth over the past couple of generations, this truly is a singular feat.
To an American, the free soil of Korea is hallowed ground.
As South Koreans emerged from the devastation of the Korean War, the U.S. stepped in to jumpstart the Korean economy.
The U.S. and ROK entered into a formal alliance arrangement. So this gave South Korea the security space to develop its economy, to develop its domestic political system.
Directly after the Korean War, all the natural resources and industrial factories were located in the north, and South Korea had nothing to rely on but human resources. The aid funds extended by the United States played a crucial role in post-war reconstruction effort.
Steady streams of urgently needed supplies pour into Seoul and other Korean villages and cities. The tools and machines of industry, the fertilizer and equipment needed to restore the land to fertility.
The driving force behind South Korea's modernization was a controversial military dictator named Park Chung-hee. At the height of the Cold War, Park was eager to strengthen his country's bond with the U.S., even when doing so provoked anger at home.
South Korea was a key ally of the United States. The United States needed combat troops, and South Korea from 1965 to 1971 sent 300,000 combat troops to Vietnam.
Some 3,000 ROK troops debarked from their landing craft as reinforcements for Korean soldiery already active in the war. As the regiment continues to troop ashore, the Koreans fall into formation to march along the main street of Pyongyang.
Opposition Korean politicians rightfully pointed out that South Korea would be akin to playing the role of mercenary in supporting the US war campaign. And by 1971, you have about $1 billion flowing into the South Korean economy.
South Korea was also able to gain from normalizing relations with Japan, which was able to happen because Park Chung-hee was an authoritarian ruler, and it was a very unpopular decision.
Although Park relied on American support, he was determined to forge his own path when it came to modernizing South Korea's economy.
Park Chung-hee wanted to focus on the development of heavy industry in Korea, and the key heavy industry would be the steel industry. The World Bank thought it would be inefficient. Nevertheless, President Park persisted. He gambled, and that gamble paid off.
We tend to believe markets are always the most efficient. But the Korean government went against market forces. They picked winners. They didn't let competition decide which companies were going to survive.
Park built close partnerships with South Korea's largest companies, family-run conglomerates known as chaebols.
The term chaebol refers to large industrial conglomerates within the Korean economy. A chaebol is a business group where ownership and management are both concentrated within a single family.
Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and SK, those are the four big ones. What makes the chaebol unique from other companies around the world is their sprawl and their size. Most chaebol groups make pretty much everything they can.
The South Korean economic development model is one of the government playing a very aggressive role by subsidizing key strategic industries and colluding with big businesses.
The founder of Samsung, Lee Byung-chul, realized that he could actually build not just a business empire, but the entire nation of South Korea with it.
As South Korea blossomed into an economic powerhouse, American policymakers and business leaders grew frustrated with the protectionist policies that had fueled its development. In 2006, the two countries began the arduous process of negotiating a bilateral free trade agreement.
I was the chief U.S. negotiator for the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. I think there'll be a number of difficult issues, but I don't envision any deal breakers. The goal was to open up our respective markets to each other and to integrate our two economies more closely. Before that time, the U.S. and Korea were basically adversaries. Korea wanted to sell its products all over the world, including to the U.S., while at the same time keeping its market closed.
Almost all free trade agreements are controversial because there's winners and there's losers. In Korea, farmers were deeply opposed to the free trade agreement that would allow in U.S. beef, U.S. rice, U.S. soybeans.
We are against the forcible agreement for free trade between South Korea and the United States, benefiting conglomerates, pro-U.S. officials, and men of influence.
In 2008, the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, known by the acronym KORUS, became a flashpoint in American electoral politics.
During the campaign, President Obama was public about how he did not approve of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. And so when he took office, he instructed us to go back to the agreement and to renegotiate.
The agreement we're announcing today includes several important improvements and achieves what I believe trade deals must do. In particular, manufacturers of American cars and trucks will have much more access to the Korean market.
A divided Congress finally ratified the renegotiated KORUS agreement in 2011. The deal took effect the following year.
We now are the largest supplier of beef to Korea, and we're now the second largest supplier of pork. U.S. investment in South Korea increased by over 20%, and Korean investment here in the United States increased by over 60%. By any measurement, KORUS has been good for America and has been good for Korea too.
Once Korea completed the negotiations with us, our model became Korea's model. And so when it sat down with other countries around the world, it started to ask for similar things that we asked Korea to do. So in many ways, Korea became a great partner in helping to lift the standards of trade agreements around the world.
But the drama surrounding KORUS was far from over.
Once President Trump got into office, he started to walk back a number of U.S. trade agreements. He claimed the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement was harming American exports such as cars, so he wanted a renegotiation of this.
We have a very bad trade deal with Korea, very, very bad trade deal. It's a deal that, it's incompetent that somebody could have made a deal like that.
Some people were worried that it might cause tensions between the United States and Korea. However, despite these concerns, we approach the negotiations in good faith.
The takeaway for the South Koreans was that President Trump basically needed just enough for him to spin it as a win. South Koreans were pretty happy with the result of the second round of negotiation with President Trump. They didn't feel they gave away too much.
With the swift conclusion of the negotiations for the revision, uncertainty surrounding our free trade agreement has been eliminated. As a result, companies from both countries will now be able to do business under more stable conditions.
The Koreans made some concessions. I think those did make the deal a little bit better for U.S. companies. And I think the Koreans very much want to keep this trade deal intact. And I think U.S. companies want to keep this trade deal intact.
The reality is that the new chorus changed so little that it didn't need congressional approval. At the end of the day, we have an agreement that looks very similar to what it looked before, but we invested a lot of political capital.
Although American trade with South Korea has grown since Chorus, the U.S. is not its biggest trading partner. South Korea's economic reliance on China puts Seoul in a tenuous position.
China is South Korea's #1 trading partner. China-South Korea trade is more than South Korea, United States, South Korea, Japan trade combined. So while U.S. obviously is still very important to South Korea in terms of economy and trade, it's #2. It's not #1 anymore.
There has been a rise in uncertainty resulting from the US-China trade dispute. The Korean economy survives by navigating the global supply chain. If Chinese exports are blocked from entering the United States market, this would inevitably have a negative effect on Korean export to China.
The South Koreans have a saying that they are the shrimp among whales. They find themselves in a pretty tough neighborhood. The Chinese economic relationship looms large in South Korea.
The rivalry between China and the United States has tested the ability of successive Korean governments to craft an independent foreign policy without antagonizing either Beijing or Washington.
The relationship between South Korea and China and South Korea and the United States really puts Seoul in a delicate balancing act. They have to be careful not to go too far to alienate either one of them.
The notion that the US and China can somehow engage in this zero-sum strategic competition without having any major impact on its allies in the region, like South Korea and Japan, is false. And that is why American policymakers really need to pay closer attention to what policymakers in Seoul and Tokyo are saying.
In recent years, the Chinese government has been quick to punish South Korea economically for any behavior it perceives as a threat.
We saw this dynamic with the decision by the United States to deploy THAAD, the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System. It's a missile defense system that President Obama and South Korean President Park decided to deploy in 2016. Now, this was a system that the Chinese objected to quite strenuously, and it put Korea in a very uncomfortable position.
Our missile defense cooperation, THAAD, is a purely defensive system to deter and defend against North Korean threats.
China did not hesitate to bare knuckle pressure South Korea. Suddenly, all the group tours of Chinese tourists to South Korea stopped. The very large department store firm found that suddenly no one was coming into its shops. Korean performers going to China for very lucrative tours suddenly couldn't get their visas.
Determined to check China's growing influence around the world, American national security officials from both parties view South Korea as a crucial base from which to pressure Beijing.
I think in responding to China overall in this century, the U.S. needs to do more to have structures in East Asia and South Asia that put military partnerships in a more effective posture.
As the United States pursues what is likely to be a long-term competition with China, our alliances, including Korea, are going to be a critical advantage.
But the military partnership between the U.S. and South Korea has become increasingly strained.
We're defending nations that are very wealthy. South Korea is a very wealthy nation. They make our television sets, they make ships, they make everything.
From the moment he took office, Donald Trump began pressuring South Korea to spend more to offset the cost of basing more than 28,000 American soldiers in the country.
Now they're paying $1 billion a year. And I went to him again. I said, look, I'll be back because that's just a fraction. And again, the relationship is great, but it's just not a fair relationship.
This is another aspect of the purely transactional Trump view of what the deployment of American forces around the world is about. I think that it is almost certainly true that other countries could spend substantially more on their own defense than they do. The problem is, in the Trump view, if they're not paying enough, we'll just come home. I think that's a big mistake.
President Trump views the United States as a mercenary power. He wants to deploy our troops to places only where those nations will pay. Well, that's not why we send troops around the world. Our military is not a money-making operation for the federal government.
This is a very strong alliance we have, but Korea is a wealthy country and could and should pay more to help offset the cost of defense.
The South Koreans are not free riders, not even close. They are an unbelievably productive ally. The United States' largest overseas military base was recently completed, and that cost was around $10 billion, and the Koreans paid between 92 and 96% of those costs.
Within South Korea, President Trump's burden-sharing demands fanned the flames of popular resentment.
If you look at polling, there's only a very, very small minority, single digits of people who are sympathetic to U.S. demands to dramatically increase payments to the United States. The vast majority, over 90% of Koreans, are opposed to a vast increase.
Our country really doesn't need you, Trump. Go back to your country quickly.
And the Koreans feel like they've kind of been given a shakedown, and they don't like it. They feel insulted, I think has undercut confidence in the relationship.
Some experts worry that American policymakers are reluctant even to debate the received wisdom that the U.S. must maintain a permanent military presence in East Asia.
That's premised on a particular view of what America should do, which is it should have a ring of forward deployed bases around the world. You could easily make an argument that the U.S. doesn't need any of these bases. But in Washington, D.C., the idea that the United States needs these bases is unquestioned.
What has been missing in Washington is a robust debate. And I think in the case of South Korea, some people have a knee-jerk reaction against even talking about it. They think it's very subversive or dangerous to suggest that U.S. troops should come home from South Korea 70 years after the Korean War.
America is a Pacific power, a resident Pacific power. We are going nowhere. Nowhere.
We need to have a presence in the Korean Peninsula because if North Korea were to overrun South Korea, that would be a disaster for our own interests, both in that region and all across the world.
We just have that Cold War mentality that says we have to have forward bases. But the reality is our ability to project power from the United States around the globe is really substantial. I've been stationed in Korea. I've fought in 4 different combat environments. My assessment is that we don't need to be there.
Today, analysts paint a picture of a complicated relationship.
The vast majority of the South Korean people remain pro-US. However, paradoxically, outside the Middle East, we see on occasion the highest level of anti-US sentiment and even virulent anti-US protests. Where? In South Korea.
The older generation is grateful, but the folks who don't remember the Korean War or who didn't grow up in poverty, they have a very different view of the United States. They know that the democratization effort was achieved not with the help of the United States, but despite United States backing South Korean authoritarian rule.
There's always going to be some lingering pockets of anti-Americanism, especially when there's a negative incident involving U.S. troops. But it's only a small minority of South Koreans who feel this way. 85% of South Koreans believe that U.S. troops are necessary today.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
American policymakers who respond forcefully to North Korea's provocations must walk a fine line. Millions of South Koreans still dream that reunification might someday be possible.
Particularly with a president like Moon Jae-in in power, there really is a desire of saying, you know, we've waited long enough.
South Korean fans gathered en masse tonight outside the ice hockey arena in Pyongyang to voice their support for the unified Korean women's ice hockey team, which will take to the ice tomorrow for the first time in Olympic competition.
Win or lose, the result doesn't matter. I hope they play their best with a unified mind, moving toward the reunification. I think Washington's view is keep the pressure on until North Korea comes to the table, or to stay in stasis. That's a tension that has been present in a number of administrations in both Seoul and Washington.
President Moon wants to do more to engage aggressively with the North, whereas the United States is a little more cautious. You're always going to have not a perfect alignment between the two allies, but I think that's perfectly natural.
Yet despite the uncertainties in the US-South Korea alliance, leaders in both countries understand that they have tied their nations' fates together.
We share important values like democracy and a market economy. We learn from each other and appreciate each other's contribution. We have a famous saying that a tree with deep root will have many fruits.
Koreans feel increasingly over the years that our shared values are genuine. They want American leadership. Doesn't mean that they think we're perfect. They know we're not. But absent an American voice, absent American values, they think the world is a much more dangerous place.
Nearly 7 decades have passed since South Korea emerged, battered but defiant, from the horrors of an all-consuming war. Since then, ordinary Koreans have continued to battle, to revolutionize their economy, to build a democracy, and to earn respect on the global stage. Now, as Koreans look to the future, they must grapple with vexing questions about how to navigate a dangerous world.
Great Decisions is America's largest discussion program on global affairs. Discussion groups meet online via Zoom and Google Meets, in person at community centers, libraries, places of worship, and homes across the country to discuss global issues with their community. Participants read the 8-topic briefing book, meet to discuss each topic, and complete a ballot which shares their views with Congress. To start or join a discussion group in your community, visit fpa.org or call 1-800-477-5836. Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by the Herford Foundation, PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP, and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
Okay, all right. So that was our video on the two Koreas. And now we are going to get into the discussion portion of Great Decisions. So there's about 10 of us here today. So I think we can probably just, if you want to answer the question, go ahead and unmute yourself. I don't think I'll need to, call on people, things like that. Just remember to unmute if you want to talk, and then mute yourself again when you're done, just so we don't have conflicting sounds. Okay, so there we go. So our first question for discussion tonight, can the US hope to reach a deal with North Korea regarding denuclearization without the support of China? So that is our first question. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. And anyone who wants to start first, go right ahead.
Hi. Unless I missed the point, why wouldn't China want North Korea to be denuclearized? It seems that to have a nuclear, country on its borders would not be good for China.
I think Barbara makes a good point. And I don't have any wisdom to share about that. I'm not at all clear how we can deal with North Korea, because they don't appear to be subject to the kinds of entreaties and pressures that we normally try to work with. And Trump demonstrated how, if you thought that maybe something else would work, Trump tried a number of things in terms of just being very forthright with them. And I'm not a fan, but it appears that he didn't have any more success than others had. So we've tried paying them and we've tried threatening them, and neither seems to have helped. So I'm not sure, but maybe Barbara has more to, because I thought your observation was good.
And I know nothing about this stuff, so I can't really give you a response. I'm sorry. I only read half of the article for this too. So, I just keep thinking with the drastic changes in the world, like COVID and things like that, that is going to be probably the thing that makes the biggest change for us. More than anything else, it's going to force us to do things that we weren't planning on doing. That's all I can think of.
I'm wondering too, they talked a lot about Trump's attitude towards North Korea and support or non-support of South Korea. And I know that it's a little early, but I'm wondering what kind of changes we think we might expect with the Biden administration. Will there be much of a change?
I guess I could put my 2 cents in on both of your questions. I don't know why it's in China's interest in having a nuclear, or another country there with potential nuclear weapons at its border. It's just, you would think that's not a good idea. The question here, though, can the U.S. hope to reach a deal without support of China? Well, I think you'd have to have China involved, because isn't China really the ones who are supplying North Korea? So if they're supplying North Korea with a lot of their, the goods that they need to function, well, if you don't have that, pressure, they'll just keep going on. So I think they do need to have some involvement from China. So, and then to go to your question then about, what is it? What we hope to see with the new administration in China, I guess, my opinion, I don't know, because I honestly don't know if they know what they want to do. So, there was criticism of Trump leveled in here. Well, frankly, in my opinion, he was trying versus, this administration, you got me, what they'll do.
I really wonder if it's possible that North Korea really wants to denuclearize. I think that's their bargaining chip for food. I don't see that changing anytime soon, no matter who's sitting in the White House. That's my personal opinion. I think they don't want to give it up. That's their only bargaining chip, and I can't see them giving it up. And by the way, in the booklet, it says that the new North Korean son is doing a better job business-wise than his father did, which was surprising to me. And as far as the troops, it said in the booklet, I believe North Korea has twice the amount of soldiers as the South does. So, like it or not, I think the South needs us helping them out militarily.
And it's been my understanding that many people join the army in North Korea because they get fed. It's a way to survive also.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and for the sake of time, I'm going to go to our next question here for discussion. And let's see, if South Korea is forced to choose which relationship to maintain between the US and China, which nation would be better for their interests?
Well, you'd like to think us, right? I think that would be in my view, better. It just always seems to me, I suppose we have strings attached with our relations, but it just seems China, as we talked about with Africa, the other, and even just this Arctic thing, there just seems to be some more much heavier handedness, with that nation. So I would think in South Korea's interest, yeah, it's better. Too, you think about some of the goods that South Korea produces. We're purchasing a lot of those. Cannot China make those kind of things too? So why would there be that interest with for China to purchase those things from South Korea?
Yeah, they did say that China was the largest trading partner with South Korea, larger than all of the other countries combined. I guess we're the second, but China was definitely the largest. And of course, since again, China shares a border with Korea. If you had to pick your enemies and your friends, they probably would choose China. As much as they might like the US, I think they choose China.
And you wonder if that's is that good in the long term, or is that, are they thinking, in the short term, maybe it helps them, but in the long term, it hurts them. Don't know, but that's always the thing, from my standpoint, where I'd be concerned.
in the middle of the movie, there was what I thought was a colossal understatement when one person summarized by saying, South Korea lives in a really tough neighborhood. And that's really true. But as strong as they are, they're obviously tiny compared to China. And if we were not there, I presume China would overwhelm them even more than perhaps they do now. And with the trading being what it is, so I presume they're gonna try to maintain. South Korea will attempt to maintain the balance. I'm not sure does anybody know where Japan fits on that?
I agree with Barbara that it'd have to be, they would choose China. The slide said 2-1. They do more business with China than the US. Well, that's a no-brainer. And realistically, they want to do business with everybody. So it's, it's a question of, like everybody else, everybody wants to do business with everybody. So if they got to choose, it's going to be China, no-brainer.
The influence that we have, though, is big. I mean, even though China would be probably their preferred partner, they can't ignore what the United States is and has. It's certainly going to influence them. I know we have a lot of South Koreans in the United States living in the US, and they go back and forth to their families.
Okay, we can go ahead on to our next discussion question. Should the US shift focus toward dealing with the nuclear North Korea, or do you think that denuclearization is still possible?
Well, I really like Dennis's point earlier when he said that a nuclear North Korea is their bargaining chip and that they can use that to, make deals. So to be denuclearized may not be in their best interest. And I'm not talking just militarily, I mean economically, and just to have have a presence, if you will, on the national stage. And I think we've seen that in the last 4 years. North Korea liked all of the attention they were getting.
I think both of those comments are correct, that's their bargaining chip. So if you were given the assignment to go negotiate with North Korea and try to move toward denuclearization, can you think of anything at all, any path that would move toward that? I can't.
I think we have found that that sanctions really haven't worked, because if the US was not supplying North Korea with food and goods, China was. So even though the understanding, although North Korea is such a closed society, we don't really know a great deal, but it seems pretty clear that North Koreans are suffering with famine and poverty, and they just, because it is such a closed society, they just don't know any better. They think that's as good as it gets. So sanctions haven't worked, that's for sure.
Until we can see this world as not having borders, it doesn't seem possible, you know? I was watching the astronauts on this PBS show the other night, and they were saying, we don't see any borders. We can't see the countries. We just see this blueness. And, you know, until we get to that point, I mean, even this week, and this is moving off a little, but, you know, the Pope going to a country where he isn't safe and taking a risk and really pushing the idea that we are all related, we are all brothers, until we get to that point. And maybe we will at some point get to that point, but we're not there now. But maybe, I mean, things can change fast. I don't know.
Okay. Let's see, our next question. Do you believe that Kim Jong-un would launch an unprovoked nuclear attack on either the US or Japan?
I say no way, unless he knows it's his last day. If he knows he's going to die tomorrow, it might happen. Otherwise, no way. He's just got, you know, he needs to maintain control and stay in power. He's not going to give up his nuclear warheads. That's his bread and butter. That's his bargaining chip. That keeps him in power. And he's not going to risk a nuclear attack because he knows he's going to get it back 10 times what he gives. So, if not more. So, I think not. Am I muted?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jean.
I also am thinking, you know, he was what, 25 years old not so long ago, and the older he gets, I'm sure the more he's gonna, I hope, move away from that perspective. You know, you become wiser as you get older, I hope.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's just, even, you know, age or whatever, it's just, my goodness, you do something like that and it's essentially game over. I mean, there is so much, everything falls apart when something like that happens. You can rattle your saber all you want, but that, I mean, that changes everything. You launch something. And I don't think, you know, you know, even like with China, you have to think they wouldn't let him do that either, because that impacts them too. You know, they're right on the border.
This is not the question, but to me, it strikes, it's possible that the threat maybe is more that he would or would eventually try to use his nuclear capability to be an umbrella if you will, a defense, and to protect him while he uses his large number of troops to get into some kind of mischief, perhaps in South Korea, perhaps not China for sure, but and so it's difficult to respond. I don't know. At one time, I think it was we were concerned, or I at least thought perhaps he was the madman sort of a thing, and I'm beginning to think he's much shrewder than perhaps we had first thought. As I think someone pointed out, he's actually proved to be a better business person than his father. But neither one is doing anything contrasted with South Korea.
Okay, we can move on to our next question here. Do you think that South Korea can leverage their growing influence over pop culture to a more prominent role in global politics?
I rather doubt it. And I guess I say that you can ask the same question of, can the United States leverage their growing influence over pop culture to a more prominent role in global politics? Maybe in terms of their, what should I say, their fame. But I'm not sure if it has a real effect on politics, especially global politics. But I think it does make us all realize that South Korea is there. You know, we're familiar, well, somewhat familiar with a few of these bands and that sort of thing in their music. But I'm not sure if it has an influence on global politics.
I can only look in hindsight at the effect that the Beatles had and rock and roll had on the world in changing the world and breaking down, you know, things in the Soviet bloc. And, you know, it's possible when I see how popular these groups are on cell phones, people are really tuned into them. And I was just watching, what is her name? Janelle Monáe, is that her name? You know, the singer. She was on Colbert last night, and the song she sang was so beautiful. It was really a game changer. And I thought, why not? I mean, we've had a lot of people in the arts who go into government. You know, Ronald Reagan and Schwarzenegger and all these people. Why not? And I'm also looking at just the way the groups work together, like all these fellows work together so closely. It's a whole different way of thinking than we think in the United States. We're very individual, and their way of singing is very collective. And I'm just wondering if that would have an effect in some way. I don't know.
My first thought would be no way, but then I thought about it, Hey, we had Ronald Reagan and we got Trump. So, and you mentioned Schwarzenegger. Who knows? I mean, it's certainly possible, I guess, but it happened here. It can happen there. So.
And who was the head of Czechoslovakia? He was a poet. He was called the Velvet Revolution. You know, he changed things. So, yeah, things can take strange turns.
And that the pop culture is certainly much younger than I. And another thing that was mentioned in the movie was that the young people don't have the sense that the United States was, a big part of South Korea's survival from the war, and that they have an affection and a connection to the United States at a visceral level. And the younger people don't have that so much. So which particularly in my mind points out that what you were sort of getting at was, or what you made me think of was that the pop singers and entertainers and the movie and so on has a much greater influence, I suspect, on the younger people than on people at my birthday count. And so I think you're right. I shouldn't, my first reaction was to dismiss it. So perhaps not. Perhaps that's more important than I would have at first imagined.
Yeah, we've been very Eurocentric, and there are a lot of Asians in this country too who probably listen to that a lot more than, I don't know, I would.
Okay, we can go on to our next question here. Oh, same slide, different question. What has helped the US maintain such a hold over global entertainment? And could these same mechanisms benefit the ROK?
Well, I was not familiar with it, but did the movie just won and the director was coming back, and maybe someone here is familiar with that movie or what it's about? So what did he win? A Golden Globe or something?
Are you talking about Parasite?
Yes.
Is that the movie? It walked away with nearly every Academy Award that was given out last year. It was amazing. And I have seen it. And it was surprising to me that it had won so many. I mean, it was a good movie. But definitely not, what should I say? It wasn't coming from a US sensibility, let's put it that way. Definitely Asian in so many ways.
It was really about the underclass, taking over the wealthy, and it was so funny and surprising. And if you haven't seen the film, you really must see the film. It's so good. But yeah, I was just thinking when I saw it that this is sort of looking at the future and how we really need to be changing. This is like the secret that people are keeping, because the story has a secret in it, and I won't tell you what that is, but it has a secret. And yeah, if it comes out and everybody hears it, things will change.
I have a question about this question. It says something about, could these same mechanisms benefit the ROK? I'm not quite sure what that means. What are those mechanisms that the US has, control of? Money, most likely? I don't know.
I'm guessing, Barbara, that they're referring possibly to the infrastructure of producing movies and so forth in Hollywood. But I think that game is changing internationally, because I think more and more countries, I know Bollywood in India, they've got access to it. So they were talking today about, there was an analyst talking about movie theaters, and they're going to distribute these movies directly to the TV sets rather than going to the movies, this analyst was saying, going forward. So I think that whole entertainment game with the streaming and the theater format may be a thing of the past. So it's possible.
Yeah, I don't know a great deal about how movies, get made and get distributed, but my understanding is that the distribution of the movies to theaters is very closely held and maintained. I mean, there's a great power over those. So, if they're just going to go directly to streaming, you don't need that middleman. So that will change.
But just as important as looking at the entertainment is just what we're doing, which is talking about it. And how are we going to talk about it? For example, Milwaukee, this is moving off a little bit, but Milwaukee Film has a theater or theaters, and then people get together and they talk about the films. And so you've got this sort of a salon happening. And now we are in a culture where people, they don't talk to each other very much. And it's really important to have dialogue. So that's just something else I'm thinking about, that how do we maintain that? But that's a different question.
All righty. All right, so it looks like that is the end of our discussion questions. If anyone has any final thoughts or anything that you kind of wanted to discuss before we kind of close out, now would be a great time to do that.
I wish we could have included this Zoom somehow with people who are in South Korea to hear what they would say about this. It's only us kind of guessing.
I think the next two will be much easier for the discussions, because they're both things that we probably can relate to more quickly. Because as you point out, apparently there's no one here that is closely related to the Republic of Korea and their development. But that's part of what this is all about, is taking us places that we are not familiar with.
Yes, I agree. I guess my closest relationship with South Korea is that I drive a Hyundai. So
There you go. Well, but you know, that is actually emblematic of how far they've come.
yes. And I've driven one now for about 15 years, not the same car, but, and I remember, and maybe the salesman was just trying to sell me the car, but he made the point that the South Koreans or Hyundai doesn't rush something to market. They just kind of want to make sure it works and works well. And when everything is working well, then they will release the model to the market. So I thought, well, that was interesting. It was kind of more of a commentary on US manufacturers, perhaps, who are sometimes too fast to get something to market. Then they find out they have problems. But
Interestingly, I just got the auto issue from Consumer Reports, and their highest rated car and I'm not sure which level now. I looked at I'm not going to buy a car, but anyway, it had the very highest numerically of their rating for the road test is one of the South Korean brands.
really,
So they've done very well in the quality.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what sold me the first time I bought one was its 100,000 mile warranty.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I think, the first automaker that came out with that. And I thought,
Right.
all right, they must really have great amount of trust in the quality of their vehicles. So apparently they try to do things well.
And when you started, I don't know, Park was no longer there, but it was much more of a command economy for quite a long time.
Mm.
And thus they got started.
All right. Well, if there are no final thoughts, we just want to thank you guys for coming and for a great discussion. I know I learned a lot watching the video and hearing the discussion. The next upcoming topics we have, as you probably know, March 17th next week, we have the World Health Organization's response to COVID-19. And then the following week, March 24th, the end of globalization. So those will both be really interesting. And I think Carrie will be the one who is kind of hosting that. So yeah, I'm sure she's looking forward to it. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I think that's our last slide here. Yep, that is our last slide. So thank you guys so much. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.
Good job, Laura.
Thanks, Dennis.
There's so few people on this, though.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had more for the video, and then I think some people left. Maybe they didn't feel they had a lot to say. I don't know.
Well, I love this series, and I was talking to a librarian in St. Louis. She called me for a program they're having there, and I told her about the Great Decisions program that we have here. So I don't know if anybody contacted you. She said she was going to contact you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of, but it could be that she ended up speaking with someone else. Yeah, that's great though.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you guys for participating. And hopefully next year we'll be back to in person, right?
Good too.
All right. Well, you guys have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next week if you choose to join.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.